turn to the people around you and don't just ask the person you came with tonight, ask more than that. And I want you to find out what was their worst job ever. Worst job ever. Could have been one of those boring summer jobs that they had to do. Yeah, worst job ever. And what's the favorite bit of their job now? What's the favorite bit of your job now? Okay, and we'll bring the mic round in a little while. But worst job ever. Okay, so my worst job ever. You just while you're thinking about it, I'm going to give you time to think, because I'm a professional communicator. So give you, head and heart time to just ruminate and think over this stuff. Um, I used to work in a warehouse. Admittedly, it was for my dad and my uncle. They had this massive warehouse. But just because I was, family, didn't mean that I didn't get the sort of basic jobs. And one of the basic jobs was we had these forklift trucks, lots of forklift trucks, lots of clamp trucks. Want to know what a clamp truck is? Ask me later. Running around this warehouse, driven by gas, fueled by gas, yeah? So you had to fill the gas canisters that went on the back of the fork truck. So we had, outside of the warehouse, come winter, come shine, come summer, you were stuck in this little metal, like corrugated iron hut with a lever and a massive gas tank over here and your little gas tank here. And you had to connect up the hose and you just had to it took about 10 minutes to fill each gas tank. And you just had to do this with a lever. It's quite a good workout, actually. If only I had learned to change hands. This hand was like Arnold Schwarzenegger, and this one was really weak. But anyway, that was one of the worst jobs I ever had to do. Quite boring, particularly in the middle of winter when it's like you start work at 6 o'clock in the morning. The first job you've got is like filling all these gas tanks. Worst job ever. One of the best aspects of my job now is I still get to be a big kid. The other night, on a Friday night, we did the youth cafe. I was running around firing Nerf bullets at young people. That's a good part of my job. Okay, turn to the person next to you. Worst job ever, best part of your job now. Go. Place I used to work, the London Institute for Contemporary Christianity, used to have this tagline, which was great, which was basically, if you're a good Christian, you might spend up to 10 hours doing church stuff, in the building or whatever, hubs, all the rest of it. But besides that, you spend about 110 hours at work, rest, or play outside of it. So, that's a massive part of your life where you're not doing stuff within these four walls. So you've really got to think about, how does our faith impact that? Brilliant. Let's find out some bad jobs to begin with. Who reckons they've done the worst job? Who
Shall I go
reckons they've done a
first?
pretty bad job?
Shall I go
Oh,
first?
go for it. Start us off, Rach.
So one of my worst jobs was in the summer holidays when I was a student. I worked in this warehouse. My brother, who was a student at the same time as me, he had the same sort of job as well. But literally, I had to stuff envelopes full of paper, so I got loads of finger cuts. Cuts on my fingers, and I got a sore back as well because I sort of bent over the bench whilst I was doing it. So that was a pretty rubbish job. My best job now is getting the chance to impact students in a positive way. So,
What is it that you do?
and
Let us
I
know.
work at Noah Hill. So Sam over there is one of my students. And so basically, what I do is I work in the sixth form office up at Noah Hill, and I work with students, helping them achieve their potential. Really, so working with them, mentoring, getting them to their university of choice. So yeah, it's great, and seeing them go through and go to where they want to be and make an impact, which is really positive.
Fantastic. Thanks, Rach. Right, over
So
here. Come on, bad job. Who's got a bad job? Kim,
I
if
won't
you hold the
tell you about the
microphone.
one I've just left, but we did a mission trip to Uganda, and we stayed on a chicken farm, and it was just covered in chicken crap everywhere. There was like shed bins, and they basically were toilets, holes in the ground, and we stayed there for 2 weeks, and we were supposed to clean out like the chicken coops and stuff, and there was just nothing merciful there at all. It just rained the whole time, and you had to walk down the hills to
Ooh.
get your water from those old pumps. And I remember the pastor's son, he was always a bit smart and a bit with it, and he started paying the kids that worked on the goat farm money to bring the water back. So they stopped coming to work because what he was giving them with one trip was more than their week's wages. But the hard bit about it as well was we went into the hospitals and prayed for people that were sick. But me being a mug, someone said, "Oh look, we're going back to the church to get someone to come and get this newborn baby." But they never come back. So I ended up with this baby that I left behind. But my best job was a different mission trip, and that was in Sri Lanka, where Mohan's church, and that's the time to go after a tsunami because they're so desperate for publicity and for people coming in. We stayed in like a 5-star hotel for a fraction of the price, and we're just treated like the queen.
Okay, thanks, Kim. Interesting jobs, interesting jobs. Yeah.
Just shoved a biscuit in my mouth, so.
Perfect timing.
The worst job I ever did was, in fact, my first job in Covent Garden. There used to be a running shop called the London Marathon Store, where famous and or rich people would come in and buy running shoes. And my job was to like test their feet to make sure that they were wearing the right type of running shoes. So imagine most of the people coming in came in on a run. So they'd come in with sweaty feet. I'd then have to feel their feet for an hour, work out what type of running shoes they should be wearing. And then the worst bit was that most of them said, "Oh, that's great. Yeah, thanks for recommending those shoes. I'll go and buy those at home online."
Yeah.
But the best part of my job now is that I get to lead worship.
Fantastic.
And I get to kind of develop new people. And Daniel Cochran is one of my triumphs, and he was leading worship tonight, so that's good.
Did a great job. Thanks, Mick. Mick's our worship pastor here, for those of you who don't know. Brilliant. Any over here, any bad jobs, bad job, worst job? We'll do a couple more and we'll move on. Oh, we've got one here, one this side first. I want to leave it all to this side of the room.
I used to be a lifeguard. That's my first job, and
Was that your best job or your worst job?
it was a good job. But part of it was that people often pooed in the pool.
Poo in the pool.
Poo in the pool, or missing the toilets, and we had to clear it up regularly.
Ah, okay. So it's not all glamour, just
No.
just sitting there and looking bored most of the time while I was out of the pool. Best part of your job now. What do you do now? What's your best part of your job?
I work at TK Maxx in their head office in marketing, and the best part of the job is probably it's quite varied. We go out quite a lot. And we've
Excellent.
got a really good team.
The good news is that James and Naomi are being interviewed after the service during after hours. Stick it up, buddy. Did you know about that? You do now. Brilliant. Awesome. Naomi Bees, TK Maxx buy the other day. Yeah, great. Excellent. Over this side, Sarah.
So yes, when I was a student, I worked in a warehouse, and it was spending all day with these video sleeves, picking the labels off so that they looked perfect, so they could be resold again. So that was completely mind-numbing. 8 hours doing that, but no money at all. And then best thing about my job, I work in the medical centre, is the patients I'm working with and the colleagues as well. That's fantastic. to be
Fantastic.
involved
Great
with.
environment to work in over at
Yeah.
St. Peter's Medical Centre. What's your actual job title for those?
Healthcare assistant.
Healthcare assistant. Brilliant. Those boring summer jobs. Right, I'm going to interview this speaker, guys. Thank you so much, Rachel. That's all right. Pop it down on the chair now. Thank you. Brilliant. Interview this speaker, guys. In a little while, we'll have a break during the sermon. But we'll turn to our reading now, which is from Colossians chapter 3. Colossians chapter 3. If you've got your Bible on your phone, do turn to it. Although it's very short tonight. Colossians chapter 3, verses 22 to 24. Slaves, obey your earthly masters in everything, and do it not only when their eye is on you and to win their favor, but with sincerity of heart and reverence for the Lord. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for men, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It is the Lord Christ you are serving. Strong challenge there on the world of work from the Apostle Paul. And tonight is really a highlight tour of what happened this morning. You had Rod preaching on this issue of God at work and being called to work. And so I'm really giving you the best of. I'm giving you Rod's greatest hits from this morning for tonight. All right, I'm still going to get you to do a little bit of work later on, and we're going to interview Spear in a little while. But Rod was saying this morning about this passage, how the slaves in that day, we often think of slaves. My view of slaves, when I think of slaves from the Roman era, is galley ships and Spartacus and people doing like that all day long. But slaves were right through every different level of society. So sometimes slaves could be paid. Sometimes they weren't always doing the dredge of the jobs. A slave could be a lawyer. They could be the master of a household. So it's a very different idea. So when Paul's talking to the slaves in this instance, don't think in terms of galleys and Spartacus and all the rest of it. It's people who are actually doing very, very serious jobs who are keeping the empire running and ticking over. So he's saying when you're doing that, that's a real challenge, but it's the same challenge to us today. One of the ways you're going to be a witness is not by rebelling against your masters, but by doing the best job that you can do in the circumstances that you find yourself in, no matter how bad it is. And that's a really important thing to remember. When we're in those rubbish jobs that we hate doing, do we have that mind of, you know what? I really want to shine through for God in doing this role. As hard as it might be, I want to keep my heart focused and I want to serve God by doing a great job, even though it's a job I might not like. It's a tough call, but that's what Paul is saying. That's where you're going to be a real witness in the day-to-day lives that you lead. Have you heard the phrase, everything is spiritual? Everything is spiritual. Everything that we do. It's interesting to say that everything is spiritual and that everybody has a calling, and it's not just the spiritual jobs. Within the church, you can have this kind of idea that there's a spiritual vocation hierarchy. Certainly, I think I grew up with that, growing up in an evangelical church, strong on its Bible teaching. You get the impression that there was a little pyramid of the most worthy jobs. And I think at the top of that pyramid, the best job, the job that really pleased the Lord, was being a missionary. Particularly if you're in a missionary like halfway around the world, okay, and you left everything behind to go there. That's a really worthy job. And below that, there was like your vicars and pastors and all the rest of it. And then there was anybody who worked for the church. And then at the bottom of that was teachers. No, there wasn't at the bottom of that, it was teachers, all right. But it was a hierarchy of these are the jobs that God really blesses, and there are jobs that God doesn't really care about. But as we've been learning at God at Work, that's just not the case. God has a calling on your life. God has a calling for you. Martin Luther, the great father of the Reformation, one of the things he was so revolutionary about was saying we do appear to have this hierarchy. You know, talking about 500 years ago. It's the priests who are really blessed and there to administer, they're to give out God's blessing through the work that they do. But Martin Luther said, no. Don't you know the words of Peter the Apostle? He said, we're all a royal priesthood. We all take on that journey of being a priest. When you look at what a priest's role had in the Old Testament with the children of Israel, it was to be God's blessing to them. But then God said, okay, let's just show you how you should be a blessing to one another and how you should, really connect with God. But then Israel was called a priestly nation. And so Peter takes up that language and says, that's us as a church, we're still a kingdom of priests. We're still priests. So you are all priests. You might not have had the Bishop of London lay your hands on your head like what I've done. But I've had done, rather. That's really bad grammar, even though I did an English degree, but never mind. But you're all priests where you are. And it's to see with fresh eyes where you minister, where you work, and thinking, how am I going to be a channel of God's blessing in this place? What does that begin to look like? And how can I connect with God in a way that helps me really, really think about that? Martin Luther. But your calling, because it is your job, might not always feel spiritual. And God often also calls us through ordinary means. Calls us through ordinary means. So, Rob was saying this morning, it might be through that advert that you see in a paper. It might be just doing what you do day in, day out and doing it to the best of your abilities. That doesn't mean you're saying you're always waiting for that holy moment or you're praying before you do that bit of accountancy, whatever it might be that you've got before you do that class and you think, how can I be really, really holy when I'm doing this? You're doing that in a moment. Your calling is ordinary and God is simply saying, I've created you to work. That's one of the reasons I put you on this earth. To do it to the best of your ability. Do it with me in mind, but it's not always about saying, this is a holy moment right here, right now. So God calls us through ordinary means. There's no Hebrew word for spiritual. There's no Hebrew word for spiritual. This is something that's quite difficult to get your head around because I think we've got to do a lot of work. In the church, we've often had this divide, and it came through Greek thinking. You've probably heard of the great philosopher Plato. And Plato had this idea that there was a divide between body and spirit. So there's the idea of the body as a kind of soul cage, if you will, And so what Plato thought was, all the material stuff, the stuff that we do with the hands, the stuff that we do with the flesh, is bad. And the spirit stuff, that's light and that's good. And so you had people take that on, people like the Gnostics, was a particular religious sect, thought the idea of our life on this earth was to be so good and so connected with God, and we had all these weird ways of trying to ascend different levels to God, so that the spirit, it was kind of like this ethereal kind of, think of like Doctor Who when like these strange gassy aliens possess a body. It's supposed to eventually erupt out of the body and go to be with God and join the great ether. So the body is bad and spirit is good. And so we've often had a negative view of what we do with physicality. And so we kind of have, it's ended up, as we've been talking about before, with kind of passive views of a body and a passive engagement with earth. So often, in the first sermon, we can have that view of when God created the world and paradise and put us in Eden, that beautiful garden, we were just supposed to sort of troll around in paradise, eating bananas, naming squirrels, and swimming in waterfalls. That's all we were supposed to do, living in Eden. And it's a very passive view of existence. And then fast forward to the future, I grew up with this extremely passive, kind of boring, non-active view of heaven, which Rod talked about in the first week as well. So a passive start and a passive end. And when you get to heaven, and it was all about getting to heaven, not about the earth and heaven being renewed, it was about sitting on your cloud next to Tim Hughes playing his guitar on his, and you were noodling around and you trying to learn how to play a harp. That was a kind of really non-active view of heaven. That's not what the Bible says. It's a renewed earth and heaven. There will probably be work in the future, in forever. Amazing. So a very positive view of that. So because of that, because the body is good, and God gave us these bodies to work with, God created work. He sets Adam to the work of naming the animals and organizing them and ordering them. Creates Eve that they might be the perfect team working alongside each other, working together, working the earth, and having command over it together. Work is really, really good. So there is none of this hierarchy, this pyramid. One job is better than another. One job is more blessed than another. God calls us to be a blessing wherever we are and to be a benefit wherever we are. So all of us are in full-time ministry. Everybody is in full-time ministry. If you've got a job, whatever you're doing, whatever work that you're doing throughout the day, you are in full-time ministry. Interesting. Billy Graham, like great evangelist, had a little notice above his washing up bowl, which said, "Divine service conducted twice here daily." And apparently he always got stuck in with the washing up. You know, he's probably bored of speaking and preaching the gospel. He won't get ever bored of that. But he liked to work with his hands as well and do those stuff. So he said, yeah, this is worship, the same as when I'm speaking the gospel, the same as when I'm singing songs. Doing the washing up is worship. We're all in full-time ministry doing what we do. And God is interested in that. And God wants to connect with us in the middle of that, which is really exciting to look at our workplace through fresh eyes. All right. So everything is spiritual. I'd love us to try and decide and trying to find out, no, there's things that aren't spiritual. But here's another line. Everything is spiritual. The only thing that is secular is sin. Ooh, the only thing that is secular is sin. Wow, it just puts a different type of spin on it, actually. But that's the only thing that God didn't intend to happen in his universe. Work is a good thing. The only thing that God didn't intend to happen was sin. Everything is spiritual. Secondly, find your voice. Your vocation is your voice. Think of your voice coming from the root of who you are, how you speak, how you express yourself. Vocation comes from the Latin voice. That's where we get the word for. So your vocation is your voice. Discover your voice. Discover what it is that you're really good at and what you're tuned to. We're all made in different ways, aren't we? And it's good to unearth that. God made us very, very different. That means some of us are great at some stuff. Some of us are worse at others. Now, you might have a different view on that. You know, I'm kind of freewheeling off some of the stuff that Rod said this morning. But there's a great book out there called Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. Has anybody heard of Malcolm Gladwell? He's a great guy. The book Outliers is really worth getting. And sometimes you think it's all about natural talent. What Malcolm Gladwell did was say it's not just about natural talent, it's about practice and lots of practice as well. He put a figure on it. If you want to go from being normal at something to being superstar genius level, it takes 10,000 hours practice. So he looks at loads of people, and one of the instances is the Beatles. So he said, what happened early in the Beatles' career to make them really, really good? What happened early in the Beatles' career was completely chance. Their agent was down in London, and one of the guys got hold of him and said, I'm looking for bands to come and play in Hamburg. And the Beatles agent just happened to be in the same room as this guy and said, I've got a great band up in Liverpool. They'll come and play in Hamburg. Where do you want them to play in Hamburg? I want them to play in my strip joints in Hamburg. Interesting. So the Beatles played in these strip bars, but how long did they play for? It was open all night. So they played for about 8 hours a night. That's how they got really, really good at playing live music. That's what set them above. That's one of the examples that Malcolm Gladwell uses, as well as some of the geniuses like Steve Jobs and Bill Gates as well. Bill Gates used to go down to his local university in the middle of the night when they had their first really programmable computer and used to work on it every single night. So he got really good at it through practice. So it's not just about raw talent. But then there is truth in that we're all wired differently and wired for different strengths. Have you ever done a personality finder? One of those tests, Myers-Briggs, Strength Finder. Who's done Myers-Briggs? Hands up if you've done Myers-Briggs. You're the type of person who always responds to questions when you're asked. No, don't. Anybody's done Strength Finder? Strength Finder, great. Anybody done, what's the one called that Spear use? Colors. It's not called that, is it? You just made that up on the spot. Color personality profiling, it is. What's it? It's so called, anyway, but color personality profiling, yeah, it's great. I've done that one as well. All these different ways to look at who you are and what your strengths are. We as a staff team went away to a quite a cool looking hotel the other day, and we got in one of their breakout rooms, and we got cookies and we got coffee, and we'd all done Strength Finder. Strength Finder was come up with the poll organization Gallup. They've been doing it for years now. But if you want to explore this later, just do Strength Finder 2.0. Just Google that. You can buy the book. You read a bit of the book. In the back of the book, there's a little code you can break into, your unique code, and you get to go online and you will do the half-an-hour personality test. And it will tell you what your strengths are. And the whole idea of this is that you play to your strengths and not try to strengthen your weaknesses. A lot of the times in our working situations, if we really, really want to improve, then it says, when we think, oh, yeah, I'm rubbish at that, so I've really got to focus in on that, and I've got to just get that better, I've got to do the practice. But what this says is, actually, if you really want to get on, if you really want to excel, it's better to play to your strengths and the things that energize you. So it gives you your top 5 strengths out of about 34 different things. So my number 1 was ideation. I like coming up with ideas a lot, and my brain spins around and comes up with lots of different strange and wacky ideas. Ideation was at the top of the list. All sorts of different things. But it was great for us as a group to look at everybody's different strengths and think, right, okay, that explains a lot. That's great. A couple of the other guys on the team came up with competition. So it's really good to beat them in the afternoon at 10-pin bowling. I had to get that in somewhere. But it's looking at the different strengths and saying, yes, this is how it all fits together, understanding who you are, understanding what your voice is, and saying, perhaps I need to look at really focusing in and strengthening on that. Don't focus on your weaknesses, focus on your strength. And the great thing about this is when you know your strengths, it means you can embrace your limitations. You can embrace your limitations. It means you can sort of say, well, you know what? I know what I'm strong at, so that means I can say no to that. And I can think about this in terms of my career and think, actually, maybe I'm finding myself in a role that isn't playing to my strengths in the way that I really, really want to. So you can embrace your limitations. Dirty Harry's famous line from his film, A Detective, Clint Eastwood, massive cult film from the 70s. He's got his line in that is, you've got to know your limitations. And often that's true in life. But sometimes you can only find out what your limitations are by finding out what your strengths are in the first place. So find your voice. Find your voice in the middle of that. You can't be, this is what, I felt quite tight doing this, because I used to go into Whitmore High School and do a championing course. And it was the guys who were struggling a bit with school. So they used to come out of lessons and come and see me once a week. I'd run 6 sessions with them. And to put it in a nutshell, what I was trying to do to them was saying, is a bit of a, trying to burst some bubbles and saying, you might not play for Arsenal when you leave Whitmore High School. That's a tough thing to say to people. You might not win the lottery when you walk out of here. But what I was saying to them is, you can't be anything that you want to be in life. And often we tell people, hey, you can just go for it. You can just be what you want to be. If you're 4'2", you're not going to play for the NBA basketball in America. Okay? You can't be what you wanted to be in life, but you can be an immense success. And I went on to just share some of those tips with successful people about what they put in place to make sure they can be a success. Finding your voice, embracing your limits. There's an interesting question here. I don't know what you make of this. Is what we do as work, is a defining thing to say, is it spiritual? If everything, if the only secular thing is sin, do we look at some jobs and decide, actually, I don't have a vocation in that, I don't have a calling in that, because I cannot see what benefit it brings to individuals or to families, to communities or societies. That's an interesting benchmark, isn't it? To sort of say, does this work actually bring benefit? Rod shared a moment in his pastoring career, probably one of the low points, the interesting points. A guy came to faith on Alpha, and it was a few months later, he found out that this guy was working in a sex shop that sold a lot of porn. So he had to sit down with him and say, as a new Christian, I just want to ask a question. Do you think what you're doing is of benefit? And he challenged him and said, I think you need to find another job. It's interesting, isn't it? Asking that question, is what we do a benefit? Because when you start to think about it, all the different jobs that we do are a benefit in a different way. Finding your voice. Is God calling you to this? So that's the interesting thing, finding God in the ordinary moments, the day-to-day work that we do. When you think about it, getting grown up in the church, you're often waiting for that blinding flash of light for God to tell you, God to mark a neat path of your life and say, you will do this job by the time you're 25, and then you'll move into this career, and then you'll do that. You'll buy this house in this city. You'll meet this person, this tall, dark stranger, and marry them, whatever it might be. We want it mapped out. But when you look at in the Bible, most of the vocations, they don't sit around waiting for God to tell them what they're doing. Abraham wandered around being a nomad, being a wandering farmer for most of his life. Jesus did the job that his dad did. Didn't wait to be told, what's your job going to be? What's your career going to be? Jesus doing the best of what he could do to his ability, being a carpenter, being a builder for most of his life. Different ideas. Finding God in the ordinary. Not necessarily thinking, actually, do I have to wait for that blinding flash of light to God to call me into full-time ministry, working for St. Peter's full-time? Or do I actually have to look at what I'm doing day by day and saying, how can I be a blessing? How can I increase the benefit of my role? How can I find out what God wants me to do right here, right now, in the present with what I'm about? Okay, before we go on to the final point, I would like to invite Helen and James to the stage from Spear. Give them a round of applause. And share a microphone. Excellent. Right. You guys work for Spear. Now, a lot of people have heard about Spear at the church in one form or another, but they might not have a full idea of what Spear actually does. So can you do it in a nutshell, as they say?
We get unemployed young people who are suffering some kind of disadvantage from a place of not being ready to work to a place of being ready to work, and then we follow them through and sustain that for a year.
Brilliant. James, what does that actually look like, sort of day to day and week by week?
Yeah, so day to day, from 2 till 5, we'll work with our trainees for 6 weeks. So we have 6-week blocks where we'll work on their mindset. So similar to some of the stuff you've been saying, is we'll challenge the kind of myths they might have about work and about looking to the future. So we work on a mindset, we work on their resources, so basic stuff like looking at CVs, looking at cover letters and how do you present yourself in front of people, and their actual skills, so communication skills, teamwork skills, leadership skills. We're working on that week in. And then in the mornings, we do our admin as well, just like any other organization, but that's where we do the follow-up. That's where we do extra time with past trainees, and that's what we call candidate support.
Excellent. So that's 6 weeks, and you do how many courses through the year?
6.
Um,
6
6 courses, great. And can you just
programs.
like zoom in and give us an example of a lesson that you teach on an afternoon of a week? What's what's one of the best lessons that you teach early on?
We um, we do what's that one? We do a lot on mentalities and mindsets, which is some of my favourites. And my mind's gone blank. of What we do? That we do one called power and victim mentality. So we look at if somebody's in a power mentality, they would like make choices. They would feel like they're in control, take responsibility of things. If they're in a victim mentality, then they would feel like everything's out of their control. They wouldn't be able to. They wouldn't take responsibility. They would blame other people. But actually, can I just say one that I actually prefer?
Yeah, go.
One. Sorry. My favorite one is something called TA, which is like different voices that people use. So in short, parent voice is like the one that tells people what to do. Child voice is the one that's like, it's not my fault, don't blame me. It's not, the bus was late. An adult voice is the one. Just ask questions, always in a calm voice. So we spend a lot of time shouting, a lot of time role playing, a lot of time just making a lot of noise and trying to learn what it is for them to learn to speak in adult voice, so that they don't, they don't just go crazy when they hit obstacles in work.
Wow, it's amazing. James, what's your favourite part of the job so far? You're quite new to the role, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm very new. I think my favorite part is actually just walking alongside the students at the moment and being able to just support them day in and day out, give them the encouragement they need. And I think it's interesting what you said about, yeah, sometimes you do have to burst bubbles, and that's hard, but it is fun to like be able to actually let's show you what reality looks like and actually where you can go as
Yeah.
well at the same time.
Excellent. Guys, thank you so much. Give them a round of applause. Dump it on the coat there now. And Spear, if you haven't yet found out what Spear is really about, there's a great opportunity. There's a celebration coming up. Is it a week on Monday? 17th. Week on Monday. It's going to be up at Harrow School because we partner with Harrow School in putting on Spear here. Can I advise, go to that. You will be so inspired by listening to the stories. I've gone to loads. And it's my pleasure to do a little bit in the classroom alongside the Spear students. And they always work, they always instill confidence in these guys. 9 times out of 10, I talk to them and say, "Are you feeling more confident now that you've done the Spear course?" And they say, "Yes, it's just been so different. It's just turned my life around." I really suggest that you come along to the celebration on the 17th, a week on Monday, up at Harrow School, and chat to Rachel or chat to James or Helen afterwards. And do that. So, finding your voice is important. Everything is spiritual. Find your voice. Finally, make a difference. Make a difference. Rachel was sharing last week how she went to a little exhibition on work at Westfield Shopping Centre. And she was chatting to people there because she realized she was doing this sermon coming up. And she just asked a couple of people who were on these stalls trying to advertise different jobs, saying, what's the point of work? And basically, when she asked several people, they came up with 2 things. And the first thing was money, which isn't a shocker, is it, for most of us? And the second thing was simply status. This is what gives me my identity. Now, as Christians, if we want to think of ourselves as a tree, then the trunk of who we are, the roots of who we are, is grounded in our identity in God. We are children of God. We are made in the image of God. If you can think back to Genesis, think back to this is thousands of years ago, and Genesis is talking about the creation story of why we created. It was radically different. It was one of the things I was really interested in when I was looking at religious studies and when I was looking at theology, because in that, he did a comparison to all the different creation stories that are around at the time. Rachel referred to one, where there's a god called Tiamat, who is basically a big Babylonian god, but is challenged by Marduk. And Marduk challenges Tiamat and rips Tiamat, this great big dragon, in half. And out of one half, I think, creates the world. Out of the other half, creates the sky. And then all the other gods start complaining, "Oh, you created all this stuff. Who's going to maintain it?" And so they basically create humans as slaves. What's so freeing is the Genesis story is that kind of brilliant value that's placed on human life where God creates male and female and says, you're made in my image. You're to be my image bearers throughout creation. And that's a role of high responsibility. Amazing what God has done with us. So it's God who provides our identity. Work isn't just about money and status. And we've got to be careful that we don't make our work a God in that sense, a small God with a small g. Your occupation right now is a vocation. And Martin Luther, we're going on one step on from we're all priests. We're all to be channels of blessing wherever we are. We're all to seek benefit in the roles that we're doing. And we can see that and say, actually, this is my service to God. I'm glorifying God by doing my job really well, whatever part of that job that is. Or it's a job we do, a paid work, or it's a job that we do unpaid work, whatever role we're doing. But Martin Luther said, when you look at the Lord's Prayer, what does it say? Give us this day our daily bread. And when you pray that, we've got to be, that's about being thankful. That's about gratitude for the role we have, actually, in creating things that are of benefit. Our daily bread is of benefit. So I said to you guys, we're going to do a bit more work. So what I'd love you to do now, although we're getting on a little bit, to do this really, really quickly, all right, is brainstorm how many roles are involved in putting your bread on your piece of plate. It's toast with Marmite on, whatever it is. How many jobs has it taken to bring that slice of bread to your plate? Think about them, as many as you can. Let's just see. Let's have a brainstorm. 3 people about, I should give you pens and papers. Never mind, you're just going to have to remember. You have to work even harder. In 2s of 3s, just brainstorm. How many different roles have you come up with? Let's see who can come up with the most roles for putting a slice of bread on your plate. Brilliant. Right, let's pick a group. Let's pick you 3 guys there. Can you give us 5 roles, and then we'll see if anybody's got any more roles. 5 roles from you guys. Shout them out. So John, Sophie. Sorry? Farmer. And what other roles did you come up with? Transport. Someone making the dough. Baker. Okay, we got 3 there. Come on, shout them out. Just ploughing the field. We plough the fields and scatter the good seed on the ground. But it is fed and watered by God's almighty hand. So God starts off the whole show. Great. Packaging it. Bakers. Selling it. Tesco's. Someone's got to sell the toaster. If you're having Marmite with bread, someone's got to make the toast. Someone needs to make the yeast. Make the yeast, yeah. Electricity. Who provides electricity? Oh my goodness, this is massive. Yeah. Meteorologists, weather reports, all that kind of thing for the farmers. All that sort of stuff. Chemists to make the fertilizer, ICI. All that sort of stuff. Brilliant. What's that? Got to apply a plate to it. John Lewis, all that sort of stuff. Yeah, it's massive. It's ongoing. Wonderful. Making a difference, being of benefit. Everything is spiritual, recognizing our role and our ability to be a channel of God's blessing in our day-to-day work, whatever it might be, having that focus on it, recognizing that it's worship. Amazing. Everything is spiritual. And we're called to do what we do well. And again, Martin Luther was thinking about this and said, in your vocation, the very first demand on a carpenter, often we say, we can be demanding as full-time staff of St. Peter's. We want you to do this, we want you to do that as part of the church. And that's all well and good because we're all on team here. We're all team God, serving God together. But then what is the most important part of your week? Is worship. Is it what you do on a Sunday? Martin Luther said, actually, if a carpenter, your first duty is to make that table or make that chair really, really well. Do what you do and do it really well. Do it to God's glory. Some challenges in the midst of all that. And it's a challenging thing, that the kind of integrity that Paul was demanding, saying, look, whether your boss is... That's the thing. You used to have those T-shirts which said, look busy, Jesus is coming. You remember those? But it's a play on look busy, the boss is coming. Well, that idea that Paul had right in that passage was saying, you know what? It doesn't matter whether the boss's eyes are on you or not. Do what you do to the best of your ability. And that's how we shine like stars. That's how we be God's blessing in our day-to-day workplace. Let's stand as we respond.